right, Dale's Report back here in beautiful Miami, Florida. Got the skyline, and we're happy to be joined with the Wake Network. We got Olga Chernoloz, the Chief Scientific Officer. We've got Eben Britton. He's an advisor, along with Riley Cote. How's Miami going? We'll start with you, Olga.
It's been pretty good, and we've presented today at Wonderland,
Yeah.
the biggest event so far in
I know.
Psychedelics, and it's been great to see everybody and to
Yeah.
bring everybody together and actually to be in person and to exchange thoughts. It's awesome.
What's been the big takeaway here in day one?
That there is a lot of interest and a lot of research happening, and that's my thing. So
Yeah.
I'm happy to see it happening. I'm happy for the data to support this industry being built is
Great.
Compiling, so it's awesome.
Well, you got some big profile names of the company, and Eben, and obviously Riley as well. What's been some of the feedback that both of you have received here in the first day? Because I'm sure there's a lot of people knowing that you're big names, big faces within the industry. So what's it been like, and what's some of the conversations that you've had, Eben?
It's been fantastic to connect with like-minded people who see, something that I love about Olga is her background is very heavily integrated in mental health. And that's really where I've come into this from as a former pro athlete. And so to see people recognizing the value and legitimacy of these plant medicines as vital mental health tools is super powerful. It's great to see the movement and how this thing has just continued to grow. I have spent a lot of time in the cannabis space, and I've seen that industry really evolve and grow and explode over the last 5 to 6 years. And I can see that this is...
Is there a comparison between the two industries?
I feel like...
I know there's a fine line where people in psychedelics don't want to be compared to that.
Sure. I feel like this is much more on the fast track because it hasn't had the history and the demonization that cannabis has had to fight against for so long.
Yeah.
And there's a very heavily influenced background in the psychedelic space around therapy.
Yeah.
And treating mental health issues with these plants. So it's just great to come and connect. And I haven't seen Riley in years, and we've been running around for a long time, putting this message out for athletes and expanding sort of the understanding and the education around these holistic healing practices.
I know this has been a life changer for you, but provide a lot of hope, I would think, for your future. You can maybe elaborate a little bit on that?
Psychedelics have been a huge tool of mine to help me support my healing since I retired back in 2010. I think there's a lot of excitement around the space in general around mental health, right? I mean, mental health seems to be like a buzz term being used a lot, but I think that there's a lot more infrastructure around psychedelics, around the integration component, and just where this can really go. For me, I've tapped into a few different dimensions of using psilocybin mushrooms for my healing, some on a more macro level and then on a micro level, but I think there's certainly a place for both as far as healing goes, and it might actually accomplish a couple different things, but my mental health and spiritual health has never been better.
It's great.
But that being said, there's more to mental and spiritual wellness than psychedelics, and Eben touched on it earlier about the integration and embodying the experience and bringing that into a daily practice. I got into teaching yoga and obviously practicing yoga, the breath work and the meditation and nutritional healing. So wellness, as we know, is much more complicated and more complex than just taking psychedelic and then all of a sudden finding this magical world. There's work required, and I think that's arguably the most important piece of this, is finding that that groove in life and in practicing some of the insights that you might have within these experiences. So
an evolving industry, right?
It really is,
With psychedelics, it's neuroplasticity and the buzz terms. So actually you are helping your brain to relearn, but you have to put in the good work, because otherwise, if you're plunging yourself into the same mindset that you're trying to get away from, you're just gonna reinforce it even more. So integration is critical to long-term effects and success of this. Absolutely.
It's interesting. I know I talked and asked about Takeaway for day one. You had a presentation this morning. I wanted to ask you what that presentation was all about. I know that Wake Network is a darling of the industry right now. There's a lot of people highly anticipating when the company's going to go public, but what was the actual presentation about this morning, and what's the takeaway for investors later on down the road if and when you do go public?
Absolutely. So the takeaway from my talk today was that, like any other drug, psychedelics, as wonderful as they might be, they don't work for everybody.
Yep.
And imagine people for whom this is a very scary and challenging experience.
Right.
So if there is a way for them to know ahead of time whether this will work for them or no, it's a blood test that you do and you come out knowing whether it's a worthwhile thing for you or not.
So how's that work?
Well, you know how you take throat swabs when you have a step throat to know what antibiotic to take.
Right.
So now we're looking to collect data from participants in our clinical trials, in other partners who are running work with psychedelics in patients. So we will analyze biological data, genomic, metabolomic data in those patients.
Okay.
And compare it to the response rate to psychedelics and see how are the people who respond alike among themselves and how are the people who don't respond are alike among themselves. And we would try to identify those features and then be able to profile them prognostically in a test.
Is there anyone else in the space that's doing this?
Not on the level that we do.
Okay.
So there are companies that are doing this on an educational, like 23andMe kind of level.
Yes.
But what we're striving for is an objective clinical grade measure that will be valid, that will be recognized by regulators, and may become one of the things that may actually propel this industry forward, because if we can tell regulators that we have the subjective measure of telling whether this is something that's safe for you or not, they would be, I think, much more willing to open it up as a therapeutic option.
So relaunching a clinical program beginning in January, and the first group that you're focusing on are athletes, which obviously brings in Riley and Eben. So before we get into how this all works, you're both former athletes. We all see you perform, whether it's every night of the hockey game, every Sunday on the football field. Game's over, lights are turned off, you go into the closed room. I know there's an ongoing conversation, but what's that like when there's nobody around anymore?
Well, I think there was, for me personally, there was probably two separate issues. There was, having been punched in the face for a living in my hockey career. There was some concussion-related issues, some mental health-related issues that I was dealing with. And then there's this element of identity and who are we after the lights are turned off. Yeah. And figuring out who you are and finding out.
Because like how old were you when you first started playing, and when did you retire?
I was 5 years old when I first started playing. I retired at 28.
So you associate yourself a lot of the times with what you're doing, right?
Right.
Let's face it, in careers, people associate themselves with what they do.
Absolutely.
You're 28 years old. You're still young, right? Yeah. So what do you go through mentally when it comes to a point like that?
An interesting process, because I never thought would I have to go through something like that. And not only was I a hockey player, but I kind of embodied this, bigger than life role of being the enforcer. I was, out there, supporting my teammates, sticking up for my teammates, and fighting. So there was this extra element of ego and identity. So I had to kind of kill two pieces of my ego. I was no longer a hockey player. I was no longer a fighter. But who was Riley? And I had to figure that out. And it starts with just identifying that we are here for a purpose. And what is that purpose? And it's much bigger than myself. And it's more of this embarking on this selfless act versus a selfish act in life and helping people. It's starting with myself healing, right? So I have to kind of reinvent myself, re-identify with spirit. It's a spiritual process that that you have to go through, and I think that's it's a little bit woo-woo for most people, because we like to throw a lot of these mental health issues into buckets, but in medical buckets. But in fact, I think there's spiritual issues we're dealing with, and you have to address them, right? You have to address them head on, and I think that was the thing that I realized when I first retired, that that's the old me. That's no longer, you know, the egocentric meathead that, you know, that was strapping on the blades every night, and I had to, you know, kind of do a little soul searching and figure out who I was, and that starts with peeling back the layers of identity, and moving on into this new version of myself. But the psychedelics on a macro level certainly help with that, strip that ego away, and really very humbling experience, and then starting to, you know, lead through the heart, and, you know, lead through more of a place of, you know, spirituality, really, honestly.
You relate to that, obviously?
You know, everything Riley said resonates with me on such a deep level. I spent my entire football career was about proving to the world how big and scary and to be feared I was.
Yeah.
You know, I had a lot of alcoholism and mental health issues in my family, which, you know, my childhood was filled with chaos and darkness, and I viewed football as this vehicle to transcend that. And in the process of proving to the world how big and scary I was, I literally destroyed myself, mentally, emotionally, physically. And so coming out of my football career, I was faced with this unavoidable reality of having to confront myself, having to confront the reality of my life, who I was. Every single relationship that I had been run through this prism of Eben as the gladiator. And I didn't have to communicate with people in a way that normal people do. Of course. You know, everything was like, oh, Eb's preparing for a game, so leave Eb alone. Or, Eb, what do you want to do? Because you're preparing for a game. Or, it's after the game. Eb, what do you want to do? Let's do what Eb wants to do. And let's get out of Eb's way and give him room to do what he needs to do to prepare. And so when that whole career was gone, and now I have to relate to people as like Eb, the human being, I don't even know who I am, what I'm supposed to, what I enjoy,
that's overwhelming,
what
right?
my purpose is. You know, I'm filled with the shame and the guilt and the self-loathing about my career wasn't what I thought or hoped it would be. And so
and
I
all
had
at the age of like 30,
27
years old.
28, yeah, and I had to go on this very painful journey. I had to start on the painful journey of reconfiguring myself, healing myself, shedding that old skin of that person that I was, that I had believed that I was. You know, and I come from a family that's it's artists and athletes. You know, my grandmother's an Academy Award-winning actress, Estelle Parsons. My father's both my parents are lifetime athletes who transitioned into being artists in their own ways. And even with that undercurrent of understanding of like, I'm not going to be a football player forever. What am I going to do with my life after football? I still came out completely lost, because without even knowing it, subconsciously, my whole life had been funneled through this lens of being this pro football player.
Well, fame and attention can be an
exactly
addictive drug,
the
right?
cloak of glory, you know, and so.
I used to ring announce an MMA promotion and get in front of 20,000 fans. Didn't pay me very much, but when I was there in front of 20,000 fans,
you feel the surge.
I was shaking. It was so exciting,
absolutely, right? Absolutely. And then with all that's gone, it's like,
you could never get enough attention, though, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. And you know, part of the realization for me as well was I had set this intention of climbing to the top of the football mountain when I was 7 years old. Yeah. My mom would never let me play football until I got to high school. God bless her. But when I stepped on the football field, it was this rocket ship trajectory of me making it to the NFL. Anybody who talked to me from 13 to 21.
So your alter ego then, right?
Yeah.
The game face, right?
How I carried myself, how I lived, how I ate, how I slept, how I thought was all in alignment with being this pro football player. So, you know, when I came out of that and I had to start figuring out who I was, how to communicate with my wife, how to communicate with my family, my friends, it was a very real process.
Like, these are obviously incredible advisors who could be here all day talking conversations, but how exactly will the program work, and what's the message that you want to get through to obviously future athletes, knowing it's the first group of people that you're going to focus on with this program?
So the program in January, it's 7 days in Jamaica, 2 ceremonies, with integration in between, and there's going to be body work and breath work and a lot of, exposure to nature and being around great people. Wake, Riley introduced me to Warren and this Wake team, and I've met a lot of people in this space as it's gotten going, and the reason I love these guys so much is they're very much aligned with our mission, which is to bring awareness to this type of healing to our brothers and sisters in professional sports who have spent their whole lives as, the leaders in their families, the leaders in their communities, the captains of their teams, who look at substances like psilocybin or ayahuasca or DMT or LSD or cannabis even as these sort of street drugs, these recreational drugs, and reframing the dialogue and the information and the education around all of this as, no, these are healing modalities. These are keys, these are access points to refinding yourself, to rebirthing yourself in life after sports. And so, for me, this has always been about bringing light to the darkness. To ameliorate some of the pain and suffering that's happening in my community in particular with the NFL players.
You have to be ready.
Absolutely.
And nobody ever really understands that.
Yeah.
But I think we can all agree that when fear settles in, when the shit hits the fan, that's when change happens. And I'm sure you both can relate to that, right?
It's generally most people actually start making the change when they get cornered and pressured into it.
Hit rock bottom.
They hit rock bottom. They're holding on to something. They're holding on to something, and eventually there's a straw that breaks the camel's back, and eventually they're looking for a solution.
And like you said, covering up. You're trying to hide it from everybody, and really you're the only one in the room that realizes that everybody does know what you're going through, but you're in denial and that sort of thing. Wake Network's highly anticipated company that, hopes to go obviously public in the new year. We'll get Warren on for another interview and ask those questions, right? But what do you like about the psychedelic industry right now? And what do you think are some of the things, like your takeaways I said earlier, the things that you think industry as a whole, what we need to improve on?
Well, I think psychedelics now provide such a needed solution to the huge issue that we have societally. So the guys were probably at the highest highs, but everybody has their lowest lows, and everybody needs help. And in psychiatry, for whatever reason, we haven't had breakthroughs that would actually work and actually help people for 3 decades now. And this not only seems to work, but seems to work incredibly well. So we just now need to do all that we can to go by the book and show that it works and provide all the data to actually make it happen so that people don't have to hide, people don't have to fight stigma in order to access it, and they can just go get treatment and hopefully get better.
Well, I think that's the big thing. Efficacy is proving to be very valuable in this industry. And if you have the data that obviously backs this up, you can't really argue obviously that, right?
Absolutely. I'm all about the data person.
I could be here, today's Monday. I could be here till Thursday talking to you guys. But honestly, I really appreciate you coming on, obviously communicating the message. Great to see you guys, and you're doing well. Great to see you as well, Olga. And, honestly, looking forward to obviously going public, but keep the message going, and let's connect soon again, all right?
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was great.